The Lady with the Dog, by Anton Chekhov. It was said that a new face had appeared on the embankment, a lady with a dog. Dmitry Dmitryevich Gurov, who had already spent 2 weeks in Yalta and had grown used to the place, also began to take an interest in new faces. While sitting at Burns' pavilion, he saw a young lady walking along the embankment, a fair-haired woman of medium height, wearing a beret. A white Pomeranian was trotting behind her. And later, he met her in the public garden and in the square several times a day. She walked alone, always in that same beret, with a white Pomeranian. No one knew who she was, and people simply called her the lady with the dog. If she is here without a husband and without friends, Gurov reasoned, it wouldn't be amiss to make her acquaintance. He was not yet 40, but he already had a 12-year-old daughter and 2 sons in high school. He had been married off early, while still a second-year student, and now his wife seemed half as old again as he was. She was a tall woman with dark eyebrows, erect, solemn, dignified, and, as she called herself, a thinking woman. She read a great deal, omitted the silent letters in her letters to be modern, called her husband not Dmitry, but Dmitry, but in secret he considered her narrow-minded, inelegant, and dull. He was afraid of her and disliked being at home. He had begun to be unfaithful to her long ago, and he was unfaithful often, which was perhaps why he almost always spoke ill of women. Whenever they were discussed in his presence, he would refer to them as the lower race. It seemed to him that he had been sufficiently schooled by bitter experience to call them whatever he pleased, and yet he could not have lived for even 2 days without the lower race. In the company of men, he was bored and ill at ease. With them, he was uncommunicative and cold. But when he was among women, he felt free. He knew what to talk about and how to behave. He even found it easy to be silent with them. In his appearance, in his character, in his whole nature, there was something attractive and elusive that drew women to him and fascinated them. He knew this, and he himself was pulled toward them by some irresistible force. Repeated experience, and indeed bitter experience, had taught him long ago that every new intimacy, which at first so pleasantly diversifies life and seems a charming and light adventure, inevitably grows into a massive problem for decent people, especially for Muscovites who are slow to move and indecisive. In the end, the situation becomes agonizingly burdensome. But with every new meeting with an interesting woman, this experience seemed to slip from his memory. He wanted to live, and everything seemed so simple and amusing. And so one evening, while he was dining in the garden, the lady in the beret strolled up slowly to take the neighboring table. Her expression, her gait, her dress, and her hairstyle told him that she was from good society, married, in Yalta for the first time, and alone, and that she was bored. There is much falsehood in the stories of local depravity. He despised them, knowing that such tales were mostly fabricated by people who would gladly have sinned themselves if they only knew how. But when the lady sat down at the next table, just 3 paces away, he recalled those stories of easy conquests and trips to the mountains. The seductive thought of a swift, fleeting liaison, a romance with an unknown woman whose name and surname he did not even know, suddenly took possession of him. He beckoned to the Pomeranian kindly, and when the dog approached, he wagged a finger at it. The dog growled. Gurov wagged his finger again. The lady looked at him and immediately lowered her eyes. "He doesn't bite," she said and blushed. "May I give him a bone?" And when she gave a nod of assent, he asked affably, "Have you been in Yalta long?" "5 days, and I'm already dragging through my 2nd week here." They were silent for a moment. Time goes so quickly, yet it is so boring here, she said, not looking at him. It's only a fashion to say it's boring here, he replied. A person lives in some provincial town like Belev or Zizdra and isn't bored. But the moment they come here, it's so boring. Oh, the dust. You'd think they come straight from Granada. She laughed. Then both continued eating in silence, like strangers, but after dinner, they walked side by side, and thus began the playful, light-hearted conversation of people who are free in content, people for whom it matters little where they go or what they talk about. They strolled and spoke of how strangely the sea was lit. The water was of a lilac hue, so soft and warm, and across it from the moon stretched a golden band. They spoke of how stifling it felt after the scorching day. Gurov told her that he was a Muscovite, a philologist by education, but worked in a bank. Once he had trained to sing in a private opera, but gave it up. He owned 2 houses in Moscow. And from her, he learned that she had grown up in St. Petersburg, but married in the town of S, where she had lived for 2 years now. She expected to stay in Yalta for another month, and perhaps her husband, who also needed a rest, would join her. She could not quite explain where her husband served, whether at the provincial administration or the local council, and she found her own ignorance amusing. Gurov also learned that her name was Anna Sergeyevna. Later, in his room, he thought of her, thinking that she would surely meet him tomorrow. It had to be so. As he went to bed, he remembered that only a short while ago she had been a schoolgirl, a student just like his daughter was now. He recalled how much hesitation and awkwardness there still was in her laughter and in her conversation with a stranger. It must have been the first time in her life she was alone in such a setting, where men follow her, look at her, and speak to her with only one secret purpose, a purpose she could not help but divine. He remembered her slender, delicate neck and her beautiful gray eyes. There is something pathetic about her, though, he thought, and began to fall asleep. A week passed after their first meeting. It was a holiday. The rooms were stifling, while in the streets the dust whirled in gusts, tearing off hats. All day long one felt thirsty, and Gurov went off into the pavilion, offering Anna Sergeyevna now a glass of syrup water, now an ice cream. There was nowhere to escape the heat. In the evening, when the wind had died down a little, they went to the pier to watch the steamer come in. There were many strollers on the landing stage. People had gathered to meet someone and were holding bouquets. And here, 2 peculiarities of the elegant Yalta crowd stood out. The elderly ladies were dressed like young ones, and there were a great many generals. Due to the rough sea, the steamer arrived late, after the sun had already set, and it spent a long time maneuvering before it could dock at the pier. Anna Sergeyevna looked through her lorgnette at the steamer and the passengers as if searching for acquaintances, and when she turned to Gurov, her eyes were shining. She talked much, her questions were abrupt, and she would immediately forget what she had asked. Then she lost her lorgnette in the crowd. The fashionable crowd began to disperse. Faces were no longer distinguishable, and the wind had died down completely. Yet Gurov and Anna Sergeyevna remained standing there, as though waiting to see if anyone else would come off the ship. Anna Sergeyevna was silent now, smelling her flowers and not looking at Gurov. "The weather has turned quite pleasant this evening," he said. "Where shall we go now? Shall we take a drive somewhere?" She gave no answer. Then he looked at her intently and suddenly threw his arms around her and kissed her on the lips. He was enveloped in the scent and moisture of flowers, and immediately he looked around in fear. Had anyone seen them? "Let us go to your room," he murmured softly, and they both walked quickly. In her room, It was stifling and smelled of the perfume she had bought at a Japanese shop. Gurov, looking at her now, thought, what strange encounters one has in life. From his past, he kept memories of carefree, good-natured women, made cheerful by love and grateful to him for their happiness, however brief. He remembered women like his wife, who loved without sincerity, with excessive talk, affectedly, hysterically, as if it were not love or passion, but something far more significant. He remembered 2 or 3 others, very beautiful and cold, whose faces would suddenly flash with a predatory expression and stubborn desire to seize from life more than it could give. These were women no longer in their first youth, capricious, unreasoning, and domineering. When Gurov grew cold toward them, their beauty only moved him to hatred, and the lace on their lingerie seemed to him then like the scales of a serpent. But here, there was only the diffidence and awkwardness of inexperienced youth, an uneasy feeling. There was an impression of bewilderment, as though someone had suddenly knocked at the door. Anna Sergeyevna, this lady with the dog, took what had happened in a peculiar way, very seriously, as if it were her fault, or so it seemed, and it felt strange and out of place. Her features seemed to sag and wither, and her long hair hung mournfully down the sides of her face. She sat lost in thought, in a dejected pose, like a repentant sinner in an old painting. "It is not good," she said. "You will be the first not to respect me now." There was a watermelon on the table in the room. Gurov cut himself a slice and began to eat it slowly. At least half an hour passed in silence. Anna Sergeyevna was touching. She radiated the purity of a decent, naive, and sheltered woman. The solitary candle burning on the table barely lit her face, but it was clear that her heart was heavy. "Why should I stop respecting you?" Gurov asked. "You don't know what you're saying yourself." "May God forgive me," she said, and her eyes filled with tears. "This is terrible. You seem to be trying to justify yourself." "How can I justify myself? I am a bad, low woman. I despise myself and do not think of justification. It is not my husband I have deceived, but myself. And not just now, but for a long time. My husband may be an honest, good man, but he is a lackey at heart. I don't know what he does there or how he serves. I only know that he is a lackey. When I married him, I was 20. I was tormented by curiosity. I wanted something better. There must be another life, I told myself. I wanted to live, to truly live. Curiosity burned me. You don't understand it, but I swear to God, I could no longer control myself. Something was happening to me. I couldn't be held back. I told my husband I was ill and came here, and here I've been walking about, as if in a daze, like a mad woman, and now I have become a vulgar, wretched woman whom anyone might despise." Gurov was already bored with listening. He was irritated by her naive tone and this repentance, so unexpected and misplaced. Had it not been for the tears in her eyes, one might have thought she was joking or playing a part. "I don't understand," he said softly. "What is it you want?" She hid her face against his chest and pressed close to him. Believe me, I implore you," she said. "I love an honest, pure life, and sin is loathsome to me. I don't know what I am doing myself. Simple people say, the evil one tempted me. And I can say of myself now that the evil one has tempted me." There, he murmured. He gazed into her still, frightened eyes, kissed her, and spoke softly and tenderly. Gradually she grew calm, and her cheerfulness returned. They both began to laugh. Later, when they went out, there was not a soul on the embankment. The town, with its cypresses, looked utterly dead, but the sea was still roaring and breaking against the shore. A single sailboat rocked on the waves, its lantern flickering sleepily. They found a carriage and drove to Oranda. "I just found out your surname downstairs in the hall," Gurov said. "It was written on the board, von Dideritz. Is your husband German?" "No," she replied. "I believe his grandfather was German, but he himself is Orthodox." In Oranda, they sat on a bench not far from the church, looking down at the sea, and remained silent. Yalta was barely visible through the morning mist, and white clouds stood motionless on the mountain peaks. Not a leaf stirred on the trees. The cicadas chirped, and the monotonous, hollow roar of the sea, rising from below, spoke of peace, of that eternal sleep that awaits us all. It had roared just like this down there when Yalta and Oranda were not yet built. It roared now, and it would continue to roar with the same indifferent, hollow sound long after we are gone. And in this constancy, in this complete indifference to the life and death of each of us, there lies, perhaps, the pledge of our eternal salvation, of the continuous movement of life on earth, of continuous perfection. Sitting beside this young woman, who seemed so beautiful at dawn, soothed and enchanted by this fairy tale setting of sea, mountains, clouds, and the vast sky, Gurov thought that, in truth, if one really considers it, everything in this world is beautiful. Everything that is except what we ourselves think and do when we forget the higher aims of existence and our own human dignity. A man approached, a watchman, most likely, looked at them and walked away. This small detail seemed mysterious and also beautiful. They saw a steamer arrive from Feodosia, bathed in the light of the morning dawn, its lights already extinguished. "There is dew on the grass," Anna Sergeyevna said after a silence. "Yes, it is time to go home." They returned to the town. After that, they met every day at noon on the embankment, lunched together, dined, strolled, and admired the sea. She complained that she slept poorly and that her heart beat anxiously. She kept asking the same questions, troubled now by jealousy, now by the fear that he did not respect her enough. And often, in the square or the garden, when no one was near, he would suddenly draw her to him and kiss her passionately. The complete idleness, these kisses in broad daylight, given with a wary glance around for fear of being seen. The heat, the smell of the sea, and the constant flickering before his eyes of idle, elegant, well-fed people seemed to have transformed him. He told Anna Sergeyevna how beautiful she was, how seductive. He was impatiently passionate and never left her side. She, however, often grew pensive, constantly asking him to admit that he did not respect her, that he did not love her at all, but saw in her only a vulgar woman. Almost every evening, somewhat late, they would drive out of town, to Oranda or to the waterfall, and the excursions were always a success. The impressions were invariably grand and magnificent. They waited for her husband to arrive, but instead, a letter came from him, stating that his eyes were troubling him and imploring his wife to return home as soon as possible. Anna Sergeyevna made haste to leave. "It is a good thing I am going," she told Gurov. "It is fate itself." She left by carriage, and he accompanied her. They drove all day. As she was taking her seat in the carriage of the express train, and when the second bell had already rung, she said, "Let me look at you once more. Just one more look. Like that." She did not cry, but she was sad, as if ill, and her face was trembling. "I shall think of you," "I shall remember you," she said. "God be with you. Stay here. Do not think ill of me. We are parting forever. It must be so, for we ought never to have met. Well, God be with you." The train departed quickly, its lights soon vanishing, and a minute later the sound was gone, as if everything had conspired on purpose to end that sweet oblivion, that madness, as soon as possible. Left alone on the platform, gazing into the dark distance, Gurov listened to the chirping of crickets and the humming of telegraph wires with a feeling as though he had only just woken up. He thought to himself that this had been yet another adventure or episode in his life, and now it too was over, leaving only a memory. He was moved, sad, and felt a slight twinge of regret. After all, this young woman, whom he would never see again, had not been happy with him. He had been kind and warm, yet in his manner, his tone, and his caresses, there had always lurked a shadow of light mockery, the coarse arrogance of a successful man who was, moreover, nearly twice her age. All the while she had called him kind, extraordinary, and noble. Evidently, he had appeared to her as something other than what he truly was, which meant he had, unintentionally, deceived her. Here at the station, there was already a scent of autumn in the air. The evening was cool. "It is time for me to go north, too," Gurov thought, leaving the platform. High time. At home in Moscow, everything was already settled for the winter. The stoves were lit, and in the mornings, when the children were getting ready for school and drinking their tea, it was still dark, and the nanny would briefly light a lamp. The frosts had begun. When the first snow falls, on the first day of sleigh riding, it is pleasant to see the white earth and white roofs. One breathes easily and grandly, and at such times, one's youth comes back to mind. The old lime trees and birches, white with hoarfrost, have a kindly expression. They're closer to one's heart than cypresses or palms, and near them, one no longer wishes to think of mountains or the sea. Gurov was a Muscovite. He returned to Moscow on a fine, frosty day, when he put on his fur coat and warm gloves and strolled down Petrovka Street, and when, on Saturday evening, he heard the ringing of the church bells, his recent trip and the places he had visited lost all their charm. Little by little, he sank back into Moscow life, greedily devouring 3 newspapers a day while claiming, on principle, that he never read Moscow papers. He felt the pull of restaurants, clubs, banquet dinners, and anniversaries. He felt flattered that famous lawyers and actors visited him, and that he played cards with a professor at the doctor's club. He could once again eat a whole portion of Selyanka straight from the frying pan. He thought that a month or so would pass, and Anna Sergeyevna would fade into a mist in his memory, only occasionally appearing in his dreams with a touching smile, as others had. But more than a month went by. Deep winter set in, and yet everything in his memory remained as clear as if he had parted from Anna Sergeyevna only yesterday. The memories burned even brighter. Whether the voices of his children doing their lessons reached him in the evening silence of his study, or he heard a sentimental song, or the organ in a restaurant, or the blizzard howled in the chimney, suddenly it would all come flooding back. The scene on the pier, the early morning with the mist on the mountains, the steamer from Feodosia, and the kisses. He would pace the room for a long time, remembering and smiling, and then the memories would turn into dreams, and the past in his imagination would mingle with what was yet to come. Anna Sergeyevna did not visit him in his dreams. She followed him everywhere like a shadow, watching him. Closing his eyes, he saw her as if she were alive, and she seemed more beautiful, younger, and tenderer than she had actually been. and he himself seemed better than he had been back then in Yalta. In the evenings, she gazed at him from the bookcase, from the fireplace, from the corner. He heard her breathing and the soft rustle of her dress. In the street, he followed women with his eyes, searching for someone who looked like her. Soon, he was tormented by a powerful desire to share his memories with someone. But at home, it was impossible to speak of his love, and outside his home, there was no one. Certainly not the tenants, and not at the bank. And what was there to say? Had he even been in love then? Was there anything beautiful, poetic, instructive, or even simply interesting in his relationship with Anna Sergeyevna? He found himself forced to speak vaguely of love and women, and no one guessed what he meant. Only his wife would twitch her dark eyebrows and say, "Dmitry, the role of a dandy does not suit you at all." One night, as he was leaving the doctor's club with his car partner, a government official, he could not restrain himself and said, "If only you knew what a charming woman I met in Yalta." The official sat down in his sleigh and started off, but suddenly turned around and called out, "Dmitry Dmitrich." "Yes, you were right earlier. That sturgeon was a bit off." These words, so ordinary, for some reason suddenly revolted Gurov. They struck him as humiliating and foul. What savage customs! What faces! What senseless nights and uninteresting, unremarkable days! The frantic card-playing, the gluttony, the drinking, the endless talk about the same old things. Trivial business and repetitive talk consume the best part of one's time and one's finest strength, leaving in the end only a stunted, wingless life, a heap of nonsense. There is no escaping or running away from it, as though one were locked in a madhouse or a penal colony. This chapter is filled with a sense of provincial entrapment and the sudden, heart-stopping shock of a reunion. Below is the literary English translation designed for AI narration, focusing on the gray, dusty atmosphere of the town of S and the frantic energy of the theater scene. The Lady with the Dog, Part 6, The Town of S. Gurov did not sleep all night and was filled with indignation. He spent the following day with a headache. During the nights that followed, he slept poorly, sitting up in bed and brooding or pacing from corner to corner. He was fed up with his children, fed up with the bank. He had no desire to go anywhere or speak of anything. In December, during the holidays, he prepared for a journey. He told his wife he was going to Petersburg to petition on behalf of a certain young man. But instead, he left for the town of S. Why? He did not quite know himself. He simply wanted to see Anna Sergeyevna and speak with her to arrange a meeting if possible. He arrived in S in the morning and took the best room in the hotel, where the floor was covered with coarse gray army cloth and on the table sat a dusty inkstand, a headless rider on a horse with a hat raised in his hand. The porter gave him the necessary information. Von Ditteritz lived on Old Goncharnia Street, in his own house. It was not far from the hotel. He lived well, was wealthy, kept his own horses, and everyone in town knew him. The porter pronounced the name as Dmitry. Gurov walked slowly toward Old Goncharnia and found the house. Directly opposite it stretched a long, gray fence topped with nails. A fence like that makes you want to run away, Gurov thought, glancing from the windows to the fence and back again. He reasoned, today was a holiday, and the husband was likely at home. Regardless, it would be tactless to enter the house and cause a scene. If he sent a note, it might fall into the husband's hands and ruin everything. The best thing was to trust to chance. So, he kept walking up and down the street near the fence, waiting for that chance. He saw a beggar enter the gates and get attacked by dogs. Then, an hour later, he heard the faint, muffled sounds of a piano. It must have been Anna Sergeyevna playing. Suddenly, the front door opened and an old woman came out, followed by the familiar white Pomeranian. Gurov wanted to call to the dog, but his heart suddenly began to throb, and in his excitement, he could not remember the dog's name. He continued to walk, hating the gray fence more and more. He thought with irritation that Anna Sergeyevna had likely forgotten him and might already be amusing herself with someone else, which was only natural for a young woman forced to look at that cursed fence from morning till night. He returned to his hotel room and sat on the sofa for a long time, not knowing what to do. Then he had dinner and slept for a long while. How stupid and restless this all is, he thought upon waking and looking at the dark windows. It was already evening. I've slept the day away for nothing. What am I going to do with myself tonight? He sat on the bed, which was covered with a cheap, gray, hospital-like blanket, and taunted himself with bitterness. So much for the lady with the dog. So much for the adventure. Here you are stuck. That morning at the station, his eyes had been caught by a poster with very large letters. The first performance of the geisha was playing. He remembered this and drove to the theater. It is quite possible she attends opening nights, he thought. The theater was full. There was the usual mist above the chandelier found in provincial theaters, and the gallery was noisy and restless. In the first row, before the performance began, local dandies stood with their hands behind their backs. In the governor's box, his daughter sat in the front seat wearing a boa, while the governor himself hid modestly behind the curtain, with only his hands visible. The stage curtain swayed. The orchestra took a long time to tune their instruments. All the while, as the audience filed in and took their seats, Gurov searched greedily with his eyes. Then Anna Sergeyevna entered. She sat in the third row, and when Gurov looked at her, his heart sank. He understood clearly that for him now, there was no one in the whole world closer, dearer, or more important. This small woman, lost in a provincial crowd, unremarkable in every way and holding a vulgar lorgnette in her hands, now filled his entire life. She was his grief, his joy, the only happiness he now desired for himself. To the sounds of the wretched provincial orchestra and the scraping of mediocre violins, he thought of how beautiful she was. He thought and he dreamed. A young man with small sideburns entered with her and sat beside her. He was very tall and stooped. With every step, he shook his head as if he were constantly bowing. This was likely the husband whom she had called a lackey in a fit of bitterness back in Yalta. And indeed, in his long figure, his sideburns, and the small bald patch on his head, there was something of a lackey's submissiveness. He smiled blandly, and in his buttonhole sparkled a scholarly badge, looking for all the world like a servant's number. During the first intermission, the husband went out to smoke, and she remained in her seat. Gurov, who was also sitting in the stalls, approached her and said in a trembling voice, forcing a smile, "Good evening." She looked up at him and turned pale. She looked again with horror, unable to believe her eyes, and gripped her fan and lorgnette tightly in her hands, evidently struggling not to faint. Both were silent. She sat, and he stood, terrified by her embarrassment and not daring to sit beside her. The violins and a flute began to tune up, and a sudden sense of dread took hold. It felt as if people were watching from every box. But then she stood up and walked quickly toward the exit. He followed her. They walked aimlessly through corridors and up and down staircases. Before their eyes flashed men in the uniforms of the legal, educational, and Crown Land departments, all wearing badges. They passed ladies in fur coats on racks. A draft blew through the halls, carrying the smell of stale tobacco. And Gurov, whose heart was beating violently, thought, "Oh, Lord, why all these people? Why this orchestra?" At that moment, he suddenly remembered how, back on the station platform that evening after seeing Anna Sergeyevna off, he had told himself that everything was over and they would never meet again. But how far they were from the end. On a narrow, gloomy staircase marked entrance to the circle, she stopped. "How you frightened me," she said, breathing heavily, still pale and stunned. "Oh, how you frightened me. I am barely alive. Why did you come? Why? But try to understand, Anna, try to understand," he said in a low, hurried voice. "I implore you, understand." She gazed at him with fear, with entreaty, with love. She looked at him intently, as if to fix his features forever in her memory. "I suffer so much," she continued, not listening to him. "I have thought of nothing but you all this time. I lived on the thought of you. And I wanted to forget. But why? Why did you come?" A little higher up, on the landing, two schoolboys were smoking and looking down, but Gurov did not care. He drew Anna Sergeyevna to him and began kissing her face, her cheeks, her hands. "What are you doing? What are you doing?" she cried in horror, pushing him away. "We have both gone mad. You must leave this very day, leave at once. I conjure you by all that is holy, I beg you. Someone is coming." Someone was indeed coming up the stairs. "You must go," Anna Sergeyevna continued in a whisper. "Do you hear, Dmitry Dmitritch? I will come to you in Moscow. I have never been happy. I am miserable now, and I shall never, never be happy, never. Do not make me suffer even more. I swear I will come to Moscow. But now we must part. My dear, my kind, my darling, we must part." She pressed his hand and began to go quickly down the stairs, looking back at him continually, and by her eyes it was clear that she was indeed not happy. Gurov stood for a while, listening, and then, when all was quiet, he found his coat and left the theater. Anna Sergeyevna began coming to see him in Moscow. Every 2 or 3 months, she would leave the town of S, telling her husband she was going to consult a professor about a female ailment. And her husband believed her, yet did not believe her. Arriving in Moscow, she would stay at the Slavyansky Bazaar hotel and immediately send a man in a red cap to Gurov. Gurov would go to her, and no one in Moscow knew of it. One morning, he was on his way to see her in this manner. The messenger had come the evening before and missed him. He was walking with his daughter, whom he wanted to see to school, as it was on the way. Heavy, wet snow was falling. "It is 3 degrees above zero, and yet it is snowing," Gurov said to his daughter. "But you see, this warmth is only on the surface of the earth. In the upper layers of the atmosphere, the temperature is quite different. Papa, why is there no thunder in winter?" He explained that as well. He spoke, all the while thinking that he was going to a secret tryst, and not a single living soul knew of it, nor probably ever would. He led 2 lives, one open, seen and known by all who care to know, full of conventional truth and conventional deception, exactly like the lives of his friends and acquaintances, and another life that ran its course in secret. By some strange, perhaps accidental, coincidence, everything that was important, interesting, and essential to him, everything about which he was sincere and did not deceive himself, everything that made up the core of his life, took place in secret from others. Meanwhile, everything that was his lie, his shell in which he hid to conceal the truth, such as his work at the bank, his arguments at the club, his talk of the lower race, his attending anniversaries with his wife, all of that was out in the open. He judged others by himself, not believing what he saw, and always assuming that under the cover of secrecy, as under the cover of night, each person lived their real, most interesting life. Every individual existence rests on a secret, and perhaps that is partly why cultivated people are so nervously anxious that personal privacy should be respected. Having left his daughter at school, Gurov went to the Slavyansky bazaar. He took off his fur coat downstairs, went up, and knocked softly on the door. Anna Sergeyevna, wearing his favorite gray dress, exhausted by the long journey and the waiting, had been expecting him since the evening before. She was pale. She looked at him without smiling, and the moment he entered, she fell upon his breast. It was as though they had not seen each other for 2 years. Their kiss was long and lingering. "Well, how are you living there?" he asked. "What news is there?" "Wait, I'll tell you in a moment." "I can't." She could not speak because she was weeping. She turned away from him and pressed her handkerchief to her eyes. "Well, let her have her cry. I'll sit here for a while," he thought, and he sat down in an armchair. Then he rang and ordered some tea, and then, while he drank his tea, she remained standing there, her face turned toward the window. She was weeping from emotion, from the sorrowful realization that their lives had turned out so sadly. They met only in secret, hiding from people like thieves. Was not their life shattered? "There, now stop," he said. It was obvious to him that this love of theirs would not end any time soon. There was no telling when. Anna Sergeyevna grew more and more attached to him. She adored him, and it would have been unthinkable to tell her that all this must one day come to an end. Besides, she would not have believed it. He went up to her and took her by the shoulders to caress her, to make a joke, and at that moment he saw himself in the mirror. His hair was already beginning to turn gray. It struck him as strange that he had aged so much in the last few years, that he had lost his looks. The shoulders on which his hands rested were warm and trembling. He felt compassion for this life, still so warm and beautiful, but probably already nearing the point where it would begin to fade and wither, just like his own. Why did she love him so? He had always appeared to women as something other than what he was. They loved in him not himself, but the man their imagination had created and whom they had been hungrily seeking all their lives. And then, even when they noticed their mistake, they continued to love him. Yet not one of them had been happy with him. Time had passed. He had made acquaintances, had affairs, parted, but not once had he truly loved. There had been everything else, but never love. And only now, when his head was turning gray, had he fallen in love properly, truly, for the first time in his life. Anna Sergeyevna and he loved each other as people who were very close and dear, like husband and wife, like tender friends. It seemed to them that fate itself had intended them for one another, and it was incomprehensible why he should be married and she should be a wife. It was as if they were two migratory birds, a male and a female, who had been caught and forced to live in separate cages. They forgave each other for what they were ashamed of in their pasts. They forgave everything in their present, feeling that this love of theirs had changed them both. In the past, in moments of sadness, he had comforted himself with whatever arguments came to mind, but now he was far beyond arguments. He felt deep compassion. He wanted to be sincere, to be tender. "Stop, my dear," he said. "You've had your cry. That's enough. Now, let us talk. Let's think of something." Then they spent a long time consulting one another, talking of how they might free themselves from the necessity of hiding, of deceiving, of living in different cities, of not seeing each other for long periods. How could they break these unbearable chains. How? How? He asked, clutching his head. How? And it seemed as though in a little while the solution would be found, and then a new, beautiful life would begin. And it was clear to both of them that the end was still far, far off, and that the most complicated and difficult part was only just beginning.